Welcome to another of Keystone's webinars. Today, our webinar is entitled Expanding What's Possible, How School Leaders Are Enhancing and Supporting Their Curriculum Through Online Partnerships. My name is Ed Richardson. I'm Managing Director of Keystone Tutors, a tutoring company that offers a flexible online staffing solution that some schools use. I'm delighted today to be joined by some educational experts from across the globe. And by way of quick introduction, I have Dean Moore here. He's headmaster of the British School in Vilnius, so that's Lithuania. Mark Stacey, who's head of sixth form at Kellett School in Hong Kong. So thank you for joining us at the end of your day, Mark. And a little closer to home, Mark de Ketelaere, who's from Bryanston School in the UK. So very much more on our time zone. So why are we talking about what we're talking about today? Well, since the pandemic, schools are increasingly embedding digital learning in some way within their core delivery. This is driven by a range of different factors, including things like recruitment pressures, post-COVID learnings, etc. But the blended model of learning is certainly on the rise. And there is a genuine move from emergency remote teaching to strategic long-term online provision. And schools, such as some of the schools that we're going to hear from today, are considering, using and experienced at engaging with these partnerships. So in this webinar, hopefully we're going to explore some of the key questions that you as educational leaders may have had around the use of online learning within your schools. So I have got a series of questions that I'm going to fire at my esteemed guests today, and they are going to share their experiences and their thoughts along the way. They've got an enormous range of experience across the globe, so hopefully this should make for some really interesting listening. Fantastic. Let's set the scene. Dean, if we come to you, when you first started working with sort of external partners or considering sort of outside entities coming in to offer something online in an educational capacity within your schools, filling a gap or an ambition to offer something new, what was the driving factor behind that?
Well, I think initially the driving factor was to be able to offer certain subjects that we wouldn't have had the capacity to offer in our school. As an international school, particularly in Lithuania, which is increasingly cosmopolitan, we had families that are interested in learning German at GCSE level and Mandarin Chinese at GCSE level. And things like that would be outside the scope of our normal recruitment facility. It's very difficult to recruit a part-time teacher internationally. So our initial sort of investigation then into being able to offer online provision was effectively borne out by a desire to offer languages to some of our pupils. Subsequent experience of that then allowed us to explore other opportunities and to expand the provision. Subsequently, the provision has been expanded to offer support for learners who need additional support, but also stretch and challenge at the top end. And also we've been able to expand some of our subject range through offering an online provision.
Mark Stacey, you're in Hong Kong, so I guess you can speak a little bit more to that international recruitment scenario. Do you concur? Are those the sorts of experiences that have driven you to seeking online? Then we're going to come to Mark de Ketelaere about the kind of the UK model, where presumably access to part-time staff might be a little bit easier, and that's an assumption I'm making here. So Mark Stacey, if you wanted to come in first, that'd be great.
So, I mean, for us, the driving ambition was to improve the quality of our Oxbridge preparation and the interviewing process. And we have teachers that are capable of doing those interviews, but those teachers are known to the students. And I think that changes the dynamic slightly. We like the idea of the students being faced with someone who is an intelligent, thinking adult who they don't know and having to form the bond with them quickly, and to not know what that person might have as a specialized interest. So I do lots and lots of the law preparation, but I also teach history and I'm the head of sixth form. They know that my interests kind of lie in certain areas, so they can be happy that the interview is going to go in a certain direction. So the advantage there is a key one. But then wider than that, we've used, not yourselves, but other companies, when we've been looking for a solution for a particular kind of student. So that might be a student who's a world-class tennis player who wants to stay within the school, but we want to free up more of her time. So we might have leveraged being able to bring in German is the good example. Someone who can work with her one-to-one on German A level at times that fit with her, which frees her up with her other two A levels, that we can tailor the timetable so that she can have every afternoon to train because only two of her A levels are timetabled. Third instance is where a student wants to change subjects, but to do so very, very late in the process. So usually we will say you can make a change up until October of the first half term of year 12. If you want to make a change beyond that, we need you to show commitment, and we're not going to put pressure on our teaching staff to have to catch someone up with 8 months worth of work. So we've used an external organization and then said, right, you need to work with this company to learn this course to the point where at the end of the year 12 exams, you can take the exam that your peers are taking. And if you do well enough in that, then you come into the class for year 13. So that means that we have put the onus on the student to be able to do the catch up as opposed to on the teacher, and given them every chance to make the change that they want without kind of damaging how the class will work as a whole.
That's fascinating. Yeah, lots of different sort of use cases as to why and the drawing factors in there. Mark, our other Mark, any thoughts, reflections on what you've heard so far and how Bryanston might differ, or what you know is taking place in the UK, for example?
Thanks, Ed. I mean, for context, so Bryanston is a 9 to 13 boarding school. We're based in Dorset. We offer obviously a mix of GCSEs and IGCSEs, but also we offer the option to do A level or IB. So our sort of uses of external agencies have been, it's similar to Dean actually, with supporting languages mostly. We have a lot of native speakers who come to us who want to do GCSEs in Turkish, Russian, Mandarin, and being in Dorset, actually we don't have to be in Vilnius to have problems recruiting part-time teachers of interesting languages. Our head of languages has always facilitated kind of online tuition for those native speakers to do GCSEs in languages and some A levels. That's not really part of our core offering. It's, they have to do that in their own time in free afternoons or evenings. I guess our first real venture into using external partners was part of the IB. We had an Italian ab initio course that we aren't going to run anymore, actually, because we've just found it so hard to find teachers to deliver it. But we had a teacher who left. We replaced her. Actually, we advertised and we appointed ourselves an Italian teacher who was based in Italy, and so she was teaching online. And that was a private arrangement that we had contractual arrangement with her. She actually left us at short notice, and this was our first sort of fingers being burned in the kind of market of online and international teaching. I mean, that's actually how we came to meet you, because we then needed this kind of emergency gap filling. So we've used external partners really just to fill gaps that we can't find people for in Dorset. I think, and it'll come in some later questions, our current experience has been that kind of gap filling, but we are actually starting to look more proactively now at parts of our curriculum and whether using external agencies can be something we do more consistently.
Just on the gap filling point, I wonder if we start with you, Mark, just because you mentioned it, and then maybe go to the others. What is the process by which typically schools go about filling gaps? I mean, obviously at short notice. I mean, obviously there's one thing which is strategically deciding to offer something over a long period of time, whether that be sort of Oxbridge interview preparation or actually a whole curriculum. But staffing gaps traditionally must have always been a challenge. I guess, to what extent do external online providers make that in any way better?
Ordinarily, our teachers are usually on a term's notice, so we usually have time to advertise and fill the gaps ourselves. And I think if we're honest, I think it's generally sort of seen to be cheaper and better to do it like that. But we've had some situations, actually 2 or 3 times over the last 4 years, where people have left for various reasons at very short notice. And that's where, I mean, we've worked with partners like you to just find people at short notice to plug gaps that we can't plug ourselves. And I think, I mean, we're in an interesting position here in Dorset because we are a long way from, I think probably schools nearer London would find it a little bit easier to find language teachers, and the demands of the IB are pretty prescriptive. That skilled gap filling has been the biggest challenge for us.
To what extent, Dean and Mark, on the international stage is gap filling? I'm just thinking with the rise of a range of things, which is that I guess I've heard at conferences I've been to internationally that some teachers simply just don't turn up when their contracts are due to start, and that's quite an unexpected thing, but that might be an increasing thing with sort of recruitment issues. But then you've also got long-term absence, where some people are having to go off work quite understandably, but obviously there's often a very short notice period to that before you then have to gap fill. Is there anything different that you're having to consider as an international school as opposed to what you've heard from Mark just now?
I'd like to be a little bit more mindful of what we call by gap filling, because that would sort of suggest that what we're doing is more reactive than proactive. So in our context, gap filling might mean something else. So as a growing school where we're keen to expand, say, for example, our sixth form provision, we may have a student or two students that want to study a particular subject that we don't currently offer, that we're unable to offer, because to recruit a psychology teacher, for example, for 6 hours of A-level teaching is just financially, it's not possible. So providers like yourself, then they fill a different gap. And the gap that they're filling is they allow us to recruit these children to come to our school, where they can engage in the curriculum, both online and in person. And we aren't losing a potential customer or a student to a school that can offer that. And so therefore that gap is being filled in a different way. The point about immediate absence and gaps where people don't show up, that is of course true. And having an online partner for that is really, really helpful in a short term, I think. But certainly for us, I would say that one of the benefits of the provision that you offer is really just curriculum breadth and depth that in fact we might not be able to offer in a sixth form, where at the moment, we're in single figures, and next year, low 20s would be our numbers in sixth form. So I think that's a really important thing. If you are in a growing school, the ability to offer all of the subjects you would want to offer without the cost of recruitment is incredibly helpful.
That's a very good point, I guess. And your school ages, and I think Kellett, you're 50 this year or something like that, so unless I'm wrong. And Bryanston, you've been around for a long time, and I understand that British School in Lithuania is a lot newer, and so as a consequence, it depends on, I guess, your status as a school to some extent. Mark, Stacey, do you have anything to add to that?
Our situation is going to be slightly different because it's Hong Kong's a city of 8 million people with 115 international schools, so we're never going to really struggle for teachers, and we're seen at a level where teachers will want to come to us. So in the 6 years I've been here, no one's ever failed to turn up. We lose about 2 teachers a year to retirement or to moving on to a promotion elsewhere. So we're not in that kind of position. But the staffing gaps do appear occasionally. So we've had them in the past when there's been a maternity cover or a long-term illness. But for us, it's less of a problem. But when I was in Brussels, I mean, Brussels is a ridiculously international school, the International School of Brussels. This is with 75 nationalities, and the IB is offered, and the embassies and the big companies won't accept that you can't provide provision for a particular child. So if you have a child coming in, the parents want them to do the IB, their English is weak, we will switch them into English B or even English. English B is probably what you've got to hope for. But they might be coming in wanting Icelandic A or Arabic A or Armenian A, and that is not going to be something that we typically provision, although we got close to having an Icelandic teacher permanently. But that ability to bring people in for IB courses where there's maybe only 100 people taking it in the world is vital in order to be able to offer a curriculum that toes the school line, which was everybody included, everybody challenged, everybody successful. And we ended up having a Home Nations program of over 24 different languages through the provision of outside providers.
Yeah, there's sort of reaction and there's proactivity, to your point, Dean, and looking to the future and being able to kind of build a stock of options, and that can become quite extensive, as Mark's just outlined. Just if I go to you, Mark, at Bryanston, on the continuity point of quality, obviously parents and as well as leaders obviously clearly will be concerned about, if you are then resourcing like whole subject provision or part subject provision, perhaps short term, but equally, even if you're being proactive about it and saying, look, we're going to offer German to a group of students who we otherwise wouldn't be able to offer German to, how do you ensure the sort of continuity of quality and the subjects being delivered, when they are being delivered externally? You talked about this Italian scenario that you were there. Obviously, it's pretty high stakes by the sounds of it, on the basis that it's the IB, that they're probably in exam years, etc. How did you go about, I guess, squaring that circle, as it were?
Yeah, I think the big thing for us is being able to meet that teacher and have a conversation. It's not quite an interview, is it? Because we tend to be the kind of person in need in these situations. But because we have worked with, or nearly worked with, some providers who wouldn't engage and wouldn't let us meet or interview candidates first. They just said, you sign up and you have to take what we give you. And in terms of that quality control and continuity, that was something that we weren't really willing to work with. But with you, we've had a very different experience where you can meet that person and engage with them and sound them out and make sure that there will be that quality there being delivered online. We've made all sorts of arrangements depending on the class. Sometimes we've had a teacher in the room, so that we've said to the pupils they don't sign on from their dorms for the online lessons. They go to a classroom and they treat it like a lesson, and we'll have someone in the room because we had one group that just, they were sixth formers, but they just weren't a particularly mature group and who struggled to kind of cope and concentrate with the online teaching. So we've supported the online teaching with teachers in the room, and then we have schemes of work and run it all off Teams. So there's, in terms of knowing what we want to be being delivered, it's we can sign these tutors up into our school systems, and they run everything through the school system. And I think the other thing is having regular dialogue with that online teacher. As the teachers in the room have backed away, we've just been supported with sort of regular reports from contacts at the agencies, just to say this is how it's going. So that's been managed. When it's done well, it's been managed very well, and we've been very happy with it.
Anything else to add? I mean, Dean, I know that you've gone for whole subject provision as well. So anything to add there with regards to, I mean, one of the questions I know that I've been asked previously is sort of learning walks. People in your positions will often be moving around the school, regularly and be not sort of, not that that's definitively quality control, but I guess you've got an ear to the ground of what's going on, and you can see and you can understand. And we were definitely asked recently, like, how do schools negotiate that? Because you get a feeling for quality in your schools. If part of your delivery is going online, how do you get that same feeling for quality? Obviously, Mark's talked about the communication directly with the teacher, obviously, and the agencies that might be providing those teachers. But are there other ways in which you as a school, have tried to negotiate that issue or that concern, if there's been one?
I think for us, it's been pupil feedback. Pupil voice is really important, what the pupils' views are on the quality of the teaching and learning, because pupils that have a really decent idea, particularly at the top end of the school, of what that looks like. Parent feedback is important because, they're very much engaged. And I suppose perhaps even slightly cynically, some of the proof is in the outcomes, the attainment that the pupils achieve. So, for our experience, for example, of German GCSE has been, highly engaged pupils, delighted to be able to have that lesson, and the outcomes have been very, very good. Parents are happy with the fact that we can do that. So in terms of sort of internal monitoring of the provision, it isn't difficult to conduct a kind of silent lesson observation, as it were, if you're sat off camera listening to what's happening. In some cases, it's almost easier to do than being a distraction in a live classroom, as it were. So for us, that would be how we feel about it, how we quality control it. It's, as you say, through learning walks and through meeting the teacher, but also through pupil and parent feedback, and ultimately the outcomes of the pupils.
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. Mark, before moving on, anything to add from your side? I appreciate that in the current role, you've talked about much more specific, sort of almost one-off scenarios, mock interviews, those kinds of things. Obviously, you're going to likely get quite immediate feedback off the back of them, I'm assuming, from your students. But are there any sort of other thoughts you have, top tips for schools?
Like the other two, we ran kind of chem testing, so we know what they should be getting in Icelandic A or in Hebrew A or the languages courses that they're doing. Here, because we have a number of providers that operate in the city as kind of tutorial centres, so we've investigated and looked at those tutorial centres, decided on the ones that we rate, spoken to parents about ones that they might have used for their children or for other kinds of support, and then chosen one that we've gone with for the particular case of the student who wants to join our psychology class in year 13, and made sure that they're updating us on a regular basis with the work and the gaps that they've identified with that student, and that relationship has worked very well. So the providers, we're lucky in that there's sufficient providers that we can play them off against each other, and we have a choice of providers not only online but in person.
I wonder if I could just stay with you now, just speak to the broader things. Beyond, you've mentioned a few things collectively today. We've talked about languages. We've talked about sort of Oxbridge interview practice that potentially could be used where an external relationship might. Now, I think, Dean, you touched on potentially people with additional English needs, possibly where that might have. Mark, can you speak to sort of any other reasons, specialisms, etc., where examples of where an external option could be an online option could be of benefit to a school, where traditionally they might have tried to resource it internally?
If we think about where we're going with the universities and the increased adoption of the TARA exam and the rationalisation down into ESAT and TMUA, we have very good teachers, but they're not permanently teaching ESAT lessons and TMUA lessons and TARA lessons. So I could totally see us going in that direction. It's something that we have done for UCAT and LNAT, and engaged a separate provider just ahead of students taking those exams to go one-day solution. And that's always been very well received by the parents and the students. The better students have already kind of turned up most of the insights that day will bring, but for those weaker ones or the procrastinators, that day can be hugely powerful in giving them the little bit more that they can deliver on the day of the test. So that's where I'd see it at the moment, and see it potentially developing into highly specialized tutors for highly specialized exams, which are for specific universities. SAT would be another area, or ACT. We've got an SAT person in-house at the moment, but if they went, I'm not sure we would recruit someone, and we may well go outside for that.
Mark and Dean, are there any other areas of specialism where you're seeking? Mark, you mentioned you're now thinking more proactively, potentially, at ways in which you might bring sort of online providers within the school. Are there any other areas that we haven't touched on today that schools might be considering, and the kind of reasons and rationale for why?
The only other place we've used languages has been the sort of heavy focus for us with online teaching. Computing, we had a couple of pupils a few years ago where we hadn't been able to hire a computing teacher, and it was similar to what Dean was saying, that you want to be able to offer a subject when there are a small number of pupils. So we had a chap a few years ago who did a computing A-level online. I forget which university it was, but it was 3 hours a week with the university. And I suspect I can see things like coding and computing being delivered online, and you can see how that could probably work quite well online. We've had quite a few pupils doing MOOCs, and again, I think a little bit in similar vein to what Mark was mentioning, with the volume of sort of extracurricular evidence that some pupils will need for American and top-end universities, actually being able to engage for the sort of 20 hours a week that some of them are expecting, that type of program might be something that'll be an area to sort of expand the curriculum in future.
Yeah, just really one thing that we have had success with here is specialist teachers of English as a second language. It's a common misconception that an English teacher of literature or language can teach ESL. It's a completely different set of skills. It's a completely different requirement. And I'm very passionate about English as a second language teaching, particularly at the top end of the school, where we do GCSE and often IELTS preparation. And in a school like ours, where it's an all-through school, our ESL teacher would have a probably broader range of experience with younger pupils. And so what we have found through offering online ESL provision is that we can access really high-quality teaching and learning from somebody with actual expertise in teaching English as a second language, which is not the same as teaching English as a first language. It's a common misconception. And things that, particularly in our context, like IELTS preparation, again, can be quite difficult to source locally here in Vilnius, but I've also worked in other international markets. They can be quite challenging. So that ability is really, really helpful to us to be able to secure that online.
So thank you for all of that. I mean, I think certainly from our side, we've definitely seen sort of areas where there's a shortage clearly in teachers. I think, Mark, you mentioned computer science. I think at one stage the TES had 134 job vacancies for computer science teachers in the UK alone, in the independent sector, I think. So, yeah, there are certainly subjects where we have a shortage of teachers trying to teach, or schools demanding teachers in certain areas. So, yeah, but I think we've covered off, pretty much all that's there. Just one thing I would say, which we've seen a lot more of, and I totally appreciate that maybe in your situations this may not be relevant, but we've seen schools utilising online to share experience across schools. So either within school groups or perhaps bringing single-sexed schools together for sort of co-ed elective programs. These might not be actually examinable or assessed. It might be we've done introduction to law courses and brought two schools together, a girl and a boys school together. So they did a sort of a program of study, supercurricular program of study in that context. We've also worked with multi-academy trusts where they're bringing together schools and sixth forms, for example, to offer and share experience amongst schools. In that context, so utilizing online, I guess, to negate geography in some ways, and kind of work together, facilitate partnerships between different schools. Let's just speak to now. We've spoken about a lot of the kind of areas of where schools are utilizing or working with online providers that are external to the school. But obviously, clearly, one of the key thing here is the sort of student and parent experience of this. Dean, you've spoken to that and asking the students how they're absorbing that and whether it's effective, etc. But how do parents respond when you are saying this is what we're going to provide? I guess what it'd be great if you could all speak to is the sort of Mark Stacey's example, which is sort of maybe a one-off mock interview or maybe a one-day LNAT UCAT preparation, but then also speak to we've decided to offer this provision. It's going to be a whole GCSE in German, but actually that won't be delivered by a member of our staff here. It'll be delivered through an external provider that's doing that. How have parents responded, and are there kind of recommendations and top tips that you can give to people listening, how to manage those kinds of experiences, having navigated them to date?
The response that we've had from parents has been overwhelmingly positive. So I can't speak to having to defend the provision. The fact that a lot of our families are here for a short period of time, either diplomatically or in working with business and things like that. So the fact that we can offer a subject to them, whether it be online or in person, is something for which, broadly speaking, they're very, very grateful. I think as well, there's an increasing understanding that online teaching and learning generally is much further forward than it was 6 years ago when we were all plunged into it without realizing what was happening. So, and I think, even situations like this where we can conduct a conversation online would also speak to the fact that, people are much, much more used to that as being just a normal part of their life, whether that be work or education. Where we have had to defend it slightly has been the occasions when it is filling a gap, a sudden staff departure, where we have then had to say, unfortunately, we are going to do this. Again, I think the outcomes speak to the success of the program, and generally speaking, parents can see children making progress. They can see the school making an effort to make sure that there aren't any immediate gaps or any danger of the children losing valuable learning time. So our experience here has been broadly and overwhelmingly positive. For the reasons I've just outlined, we haven't really had to yet defend it as a provision that we offer.
Mark Stacey, do you have anything to sort of add to?
There's a high degree of trust amongst the parents in terms of what we do and how we do it and why we do things. The results have been very, very strong. As we've mentioned, we've mainly used it for Oxbridge preparation. They appreciate the reasoning behind it. And it's helped that Oxbridge has moved to online interviews for lots of international students. So in many ways, it is the right kind of preparation that you don't get from a personal interview. within the space. The only slight criticism we've had with an outside provider, we have created a course with IE, the business university in Madrid, and that course we call it the mini MBA. They get upset about that. They call it a junior management program, but it's a university level course that carries ECTS points, and that's taught with a flipped classroom model. So it's 7 p.m. The lessons are our time, so that the professor in Madrid can teach it. And there's been some complaints about kind of the timing of that, but not the provision. We've absorbed all costs within school, so the cost of the mock interviews, the UCAT, the LNAT, and the cost of the mini MBA. We take those on board, so we're never charging the parents for anything that they could possibly deem to be not equivalent to what we offer in person, and that helps.
That's interesting, yeah, because obviously different schools take different models with respect to that, sometimes passing on part of the cost or all of the cost. So, that's interesting. The other, Mark, have you got anything else to add there in terms of presenting to parents? Obviously, it seems like your experience to date has been a bit more reactionary because of need, and how to mitigate and manage that. Any guidance and advice, having navigated it yourself?
We're similar to Dean, to be honest. The parents have generally been very supportive. Ultimately, they just want their children to achieve and do the best they can, and actually if that can be achieved by using an online teacher, then they're fine with it. We obviously talk to them. We've consulted with the parents and the pupils on the occasions we've done this, and kept a close eye on it. So yeah, the parents are fine with it. It sort of tallies a bit. We kind of talk a lot about wanting the pupils to sort of be unbounded, and this in a way allows us to be unbounded, because if we can't meet some sort of need locally, then we'll do it online. We have had occasional little comments like, "Oh, this feels like COVID again." We're just careful to try and make sure that the timing of the lessons is as amenable as it can be. I mean, actually, it's the interesting thing with some of the online provision. It's also helped us solve some timetabling problems, because we've been able to say, actually, we can take that lesson that couldn't happen for all 4 or 5 of you in the timetable day, and it can happen in a prep in an evening or an afternoon. And again, I think parents like that creative approach, that they see us trying to solve problems for them rather than just saying it can't be done. Sorry.
And if I could just start with you for the final round, as we just a couple more questions to go, and then I'll leave you to your busy days. You mentioned at the beginning you're making more of a switch as a school to thinking more proactively potentially about incorporating online. Do you think, I mean, what does that look like in your case, if you're able to kind of share that? And do you think schools will increasingly design staffing models around a deliberate blend between sort of in-house and external, specialities potentially? I mean, I was at a conference earlier this year where hybrid teaching and learning was talked about hugely, and this is one of the ways to potentially address one of the issues, which is the staffing recruitment issues around getting more teachers into schools. But I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts around it, perhaps not becoming a fallback option, but more becoming a kind of an intentional strategy potentially in your setting. Obviously, pending on what you're able to share.
No, I know, and I think across the sector in the UK, with the VAT on school fees has been a game changer for schools in terms of looking at their curriculum model, their staffing costs, their timetables, their set sizes. And I can imagine that there'll be a lot of schools looking at the tiny sets and saying, actually, is it cheaper to deliver those courses in small subjects where there might only be 1 or 2 or 3 pupils studying them, and actually, rather than hiring a teacher and employing someone part-time, is it cheaper to deliver that with an online tutor? So I think out of necessity, probably schools will be looking at a blended model, and I think it'll be interesting to see where schools' values lie in terms of, I talked to some other school leaders who have quite a kind of surgical approach to, we're just cutting costs, we'll cut subjects, and that's how we'll manage this situation. There are others who come at it from a bit more of a kind of architect, kind of we'll build and we'll keep that breadth. And I think for a lot of us, and certainly I am very much of view, we want to preserve breadth in the curriculum, and actually we've got to work intelligently and creatively to do that. And if that means that some of these small subjects survive because they're delivered online, then that's a way of doing it. And I'd rather do that than cut out It's a little bit like what Dean was talking about. You want to be able to deliver these small subjects and have pupils come to the school. I guess from our point of view, it's just how much of that would be online. My slight concern is, what if an IB student ended up with half of their program being delivered online, because they happen to pick 3 small subjects, and then would a parent say, well, actually, why would I send my pupil to that school, or my child to that school, when half the program will be online and I can find somewhere where it'll be all in person? And I think the sort of general conclusion of COVID was that teaching and learning definitely happens best in person. And so I think that'll be a big call for us as we look at this in future, is what percentage of a child's curriculum will be online or not. I think there's that side of it. Languages are interesting ones as well. I mean, there's the cost size with the small sets. I think availability of teachers, we do worry a little bit about where the teachers will come from in some subjects as that pipeline of language graduates coming out of university dries up. Who will be teaching languages in 5 years, 10 years? So there are some big questions out there for us.
Just to your point, before I come on to you, Dean, about this idea of the proportion of time that is online. This isn't necessarily from a Keystone customer, more from just speaking to schools. One school I know specifically has in their blocks that you can select subjects for, and obviously clearly this works well at A level. I'm less sure about the timetabling IB. I don't have a huge amount of experience in that. They've only got one block in which essentially everyone in that block, every subject in that block, is essentially an online option. And so effectively they're controlling the proportion of online time. But then also clearly what they're also then doing, to Dean's point, is they're restricting the choice, because in reality, if you happen to want to do 2 subjects in that block, then you've got an issue there. But I guess that restriction around subject selection has been there, limited by timetabling traditionally, has been there for a long time anyway. But I certainly know that schools have looked to kind of delineate the kind of online block and separate that out and say, look, we can offer it, but ultimately that's an online option. Just thought I'd share that as one way in which I know that some schools are navigating that issue about the proportion of time spent online. Dean, coming to you.
Yeah, I mean, broadly similar, I think, to what Marcus said. I mean, for us, I think what it provides is an opportunity to expand the curriculum and keep costs down. Again, internationally, recruitment is more challenging at times, particularly for smaller subjects. But it's not really just about smaller subjects either. Some of the ways in which we've used online tutoring is really for things like stretch and challenge. So the pupil is otherwise engaged in normal, in inverted commas, teaching and learning face-to-face in school, but would benefit from support or stretch and challenge. And these things can be built in quite easily. And again, in terms of things like the language provision and that which we offer, we can expand the amount of languages that we can offer within our school, really to suit anybody that wants to join our school. And so that's incredibly helpful too. We don't really have a concern here about the sort of amount of time that children spend online, because we would naturally limit that anyway. That we certainly wouldn't allow a pupil to do a third or 2/3 of their curriculum online. That wouldn't fit into the way in which we structure our school and our timetabling. So we don't really have that concern. We're quite canny in the way that we timetable it, in the way that we do it. Again, it's really more in our case about providing something for children that as a smaller school we can't otherwise provide.
And Mark Stacey, do you have any thoughts more broadly about, do you think that, what you think schools will do? I take your point. Hong Kong, we have an office there. It's it's got lots and lots of schools there already. It's a thriving market, lots of teachers there. So perhaps the drive towards a more kind of hybrid model, there might be less demand on that. But I guess more generally, what are your thoughts around it becoming more of an intentional strategy? I guess beyond what you've already spoken to with respect to things like Oxbridge, which I totally get the rationale that you've explained as to why that would be a necessity.
Well, I think you could see reasons for specialization, maybe not as whole course, but kind of interspersed within that course. And I think about something like with exams about to happen, if we found a world-class person who could deliver a history exams masterclass off the back of 15 years worth of experience as a principal examiner, then why would we not employ that person to deliver a 1 hour thing in the week before the exams to kind of go through best case scenario answers and how to approach questions? I mean, I've worked with a number of people. I was principal examiner for AQA for 10 years, and I would have colleagues that I'd have no hesitation in saying they know the exams better than the teachers here. That's not an indictment of the teachers here. They've got fantastic experience and are excellent teachers. But when you're at this stage and students are nervous, it's often useful to be able to bring in someone who can say categorically, if you do this, we are instructed to reward it in this way. And as the prioritizing of results becomes more important, I think that's really significant. If we had a brilliant SAT teacher who happened to only be available online, I would take the online SAT teacher over somebody that was doing it as a bit part of another job that they were doing. I think in subjects like TOK, where often a school will teach it in a certain way and it will become narrower and narrower as the same person delivers it. Again, it's TOK examining season has recently finished, but somebody who is a TOK examiner who can highlight all of the best examples from the previous year's work is worth their weight in gold compared to someone who does it alongside the teaching of another IB subject and doesn't have the chance to get out. So I can certainly see the place for specialization there beyond just those kind of interview preparations and university test preparations that we see a lot of. We've got a college counsellor here who's formerly a professor of engineering at Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. If she chose to move overseas, I would cheerfully carry on employing her to be the counsellor for our engineering students, because she is light years ahead of everybody else I've ever worked with in understanding what university engineering is like and speaking the language of university engineering for the test level and for the interview level and for the reality of the course. So you could easily see how highly specialized people would become enormously valuable to a school that is after the best, regardless of where the best is based.
That makes a huge amount of sense. Thank you for that, and thank you all. I want to close by asking you a very simple question, which is around, what one thing do you know now as a result of working with external providers in some way online, that you wish you'd understood at the start? 'Cause I'm assuming there might be some people who would listen to this who haven't started on that journey yet, or if they have, they're perhaps forced into it and now thinking about it more strategically, as the other Mark was mentioning. So I'd love to come to you for that. But just one final quick question I wanted to ask, and anyone can chip in here. There is a school of thought here that we've been teaching for 12 years online. And obviously the majority of that is one-to-one and small group. And we would argue that and I've designed a professional development program for our employed tutors. We have 60 salaried members of staff. And naively, when I came from teaching, I thought, well, that we could just train them in a sort of PGCE style and it would all be great. But the reality is there is a significant difference between the way in which a tutor operates and a teacher operates because of the nature of the environment in which they're operating in. But one thing we've also noted is there's a significant difference between online and in person. So to the extent that you're engaging with online partners, are you looking for the same elements of quality in the context? Obviously, exposition is one thing that would be the same online as it would be in person. But I guess the way in which you explain things might be different in that context. When you're thinking about online providers and you're looking at quality tutors and teachers that are providing online, do you look at anything differently in the recruitment process that you wouldn't, do you know what I mean, that you would do either as an addition to what you would normally do in person if you're recruiting somebody? I'm just putting it out there. I'm not saying that you should or that you do, assuming, but I'm just curious as to, because this is a debate that's starting to come out. We've got the online PGCEs now that are starting to be developed where it's genuinely for actually online teaching rather than just teaching people the PGCE online, if that makes sense. So I'm just curious as to your thoughts around having recruited people online, whether or not you're looking for anything different to what you would ordinarily be looking for in person. Long question, apologies, but hopefully you got the substance of it.
Really, two things spring to mind when you ask that question. One is how engaging that person is online. It is a skill, and when we meet potential tutors online, or even frankly potential teachers online, you can tell very quickly how engaging they would be with the children online. And so being engaging, being energetic, and being interesting is number one. The second thing, though, is there's a tendency, I think, for some online teachers to engage in too much exposition and actually not being afraid to give the children something to do, and for there to be some silence while the student is working on a piece of work is actually a really key skill too. You don't have to speak for an hour because that can very quickly become quite dry. So when we're recruiting online and we're reviewing what the teachers are doing, we do often look for the confidence that a teacher has to actually allow for there to be some silence and to give the pupils something to do.
Anyone else got anything to add, I guess, with regards to when thinking about an online teacher as opposed to recruiting a face-to-face one?
Yeah, I'm 100% with Dean there. The crucial thing is you want that person to be credible and have presence online, because that first engagement in the scene setting with lessons is crucial. But the kids have to be the ones working the hardest, and it's really interesting. The really confident, competent online teachers are the ones who've got clear, tasks set for the pupils. They've got clear expectations of what they're doing, and they get them to do the work, and they give them time to do it. And the conversations we have when we talk to these guys are, how will you assess how the pupils are understanding, and how will you feed back, and to make sure that there's a really clear sense of the pupils working and getting feedback, rather than, as Dean said, the danger is people just launch too much into an hour-long lecture and suddenly all the screens are being turned off and the kids are switching off. So that's the big one for us. And I think in answer to the other part of the long question, what have we learned that we didn't know at the beginning? I think the first time we went into this, we were really, and it was in one of those reactive situations, but actually that this could be set up quickly, and that, when there's a partner that you're working with that has a well-qualified pool of teachers, with DBS checks done, and because that was our big concern, was would we be able to get this in place in time, and actually it can be done, and it can take a lot of pressure off your own HR team, and us as leaders. So that was probably our biggest degree of nervousness when we first went into this, was how would all that work, and it has worked very smoothly and seamlessly.
Dean's point about people being comfortable with silence is a very good one. If you're in the classroom, you can have silence while you walk around, while you point things out, while you go and correct a child. But if you're just sitting in front of a screen, the ability to give 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds of silence takes an awful lot of courage. We were quite lucky in retrospect, not at the time, but the amount of time we spent teaching online during COVID in Hong Kong, and the amount of time that our teaching was interrupted, meant that I think we have a really good idea about what constitutes good online teaching. And we'd switch to school days that were still having kind of like 6 full lessons, but we would have camera off time, we'd have breakout sessions. So the other thing will be to look at the degree of comfort that person has when you interview them online, and asking them to do a mock lesson, or to do something, or to switch between screens, to put people into a breakout room, because you could be the most personable teacher in the world in the classroom, but if you can't make the tech work, you're going to lose your children very, very quickly. And the other thing is an awareness that with the ability that we now have technologically to record everything that's happening in that classroom, and to have a full transcript that is then summarized, you have to be aware that if you're going down this particular route, and potentially kids will be accessing their learning at home, the parents could be over the shoulder listening in, looking at the transcript afterwards, discussing with the child, why did so-and-so say this? Does he always do that? Does he always talk all the way through the lesson? So you are much more potentially on show and recordable than you are in the classroom.
Is there a top tip, just finally from you, with regards to what you know now in terms of working with external partners, that you wish you'd understood, before you started? Or
I think the key thing is to look for good people, and for a range of them, because if you're looking at external partners, you can look all over the world, and if you can look all over the world, then you can drive the price down.
Dean, and finally, to come to you.
Top tip from us would be really that it don't always let need and panic drive it. Actually, strategically look at ways in which the online provision can support and broaden your curriculum. And don't be afraid of it. It is a thing that's here to stay. It's a perfectly acceptable and reasonable way to learn online. Just embrace it for what it is, and allow it to support your curriculum development.